Welcome to the Baer Faxt Live from Art Basel Miami Beach, brought to you by Turon Travel, the world's art travel specialist. They have been facilitating travel to the world's art fairs for over 40 years. I know, I've used them all that time. Head to turontravel.com to get your discounted flights and hotels for art fairs and other events. So here we go. We're 2 hours into Art Basel Miami Beach. We were able to move Audrey Ou, our guest, collector, founder of TRLab, to come join us in the middle of the fair. What's going on the floor? What have you seen so far?
Well, it's been very busy. I have not been able to see as much as I would have liked because there was a long line.
You know what I call that? I call that Zama Quan Hua.
How did you learn that term, Josh?
Everybody knows that I've been studying Cantonese in the afternoons and Mandarin at night.
Amazing. I think the term Zoma Guanhua is right. I felt like I did a quick look through. I was hoping to report back to you about a lot of what I've seen, but it's a lot of saying hi to people, getting stopped, and I think I've probably only seen around 5% of what I wanted to see.
No. Did you have any works on reserve for yourself?
I did not for myself, but for my family, there are a couple works that I had to go check out on behalf of my mom.
So you were there in the first hour to see if the reserves should go through?
There were two works that I was looking at that my mom wanted me to take a peek at, and
did you buy them?
No.
Were they upset?
No.
Do you have the feeling that there were 10 more people ready to go behind you?
Yes.
Are you going to tell us who they were?
No.
Can you explain a little bit your family's role in collecting too? Because it's,
actually, I think you'd be interested in this because
I don't know all the details.
So my mom is really the main collector of my family. We founded Rockbun Art Museum in 2010, but Rockbun is not a collecting institution. I think because of Rockbun, my family became more exposed to the contemporary art world.
So it's a Kunsthalle in effect.
Yes, and we began to learn about contemporary art and began collecting. But, you know, like most other Chinese families, I would say it hasn't been a long journey for us. And I feel very lucky because my mom is very academic. People would know her say that she's a very specific collector. I've heard her described as a black hole. It's like when she collects a work, you'll never see it on the market again. We don't, we collect for the sake of collecting as a family and not in thinking about investment. So
if you make it a firm rule that we never sell anything, it becomes much easier to deal with it. Once you do it once, it's like almost that everything is on the table. So if that's the rule and you stick to it, I think it's a good rule.
It's actually, it's almost like an unspoken rule. And I think because my mom studies so diligently the artists that she's interested in and wants to collect, that she has a very strong sentiment about the artists and their research and practice before she even goes ahead with collecting. So there's no like looking at a work, it looks great, and then becoming interested. It's very much so approaching it, knowing about the artist's background, where they were placed in historical context. That's very important to
So how is she and you're obviously eyes out here getting the information. So let's take an artist. I don't know, give me an artist that she loves.
Agnes Martin.
Okay, which is an interesting conversation. So how would she go about gathering all this knowledge of Agnes Martin? So
I think this is something where I really respect my mom. She tends to go for professors in across different universities, and curators. So Xju Noel, who used to be at the Guggenheim but joined my family's art museum as its artistic director earlier this year. X and my mom actually got to know each other because my parents supported the China After 1989 show at the Guggenheim a few years back. And afterwards, they stayed in conversation, and my mom, in the midst of COVID, had said to X, like, I want to start a tutoring session between you and me, where twice a week we'll do one-hour sessions where you walk me through the history of curation. So I think she learns about art through different ways. Like she takes musical theory classes, she takes classes on like the Republic China literatures, and all that goes towards formation of, I think, a more scholarly critical thinking. I cannot say that I follow the same path.
But it's interesting because I often, if you've seen my talks, I often say, like, how do you get information? And most people don't have a formal process. And for starting it to really, that she's answered that, I think there's some truth that since all art is so new to people in China because of it being so restricted from the rest of the world, a certain matter of levelness of old masters to contemporary impressionists, all that information sort of coming all at once. Whereas in the West, you sort of grew up with these baby steps. Do you think there's some accuracy to that in general, or is that my Western?
Yes, I think so much has changed in China in the last couple of decades, and China was really exposed to the contemporary and commercial art world. So I think that there's an overwhelming sense of like, you try to do everything at once. And one of the things I appreciate my mom for is that, and one of the things that she's taught me is she kind of focused on a single focal point, and then she goes out from there. So it never feels overwhelming. It never feels like it's no longer fun.
She's smart. This is a good way to do it. I do this with new clients. It's like, choose one artist, let's learn everything, read everything, look around the world for all the Agnes Martins there are in the world, and which is the best one, and then have somebody see it in person, because especially with that, you can't do that with a JPEG. So,
but I think there's something actually really interesting happening between the older collectors in China and then the younger collector generation that I'm a part of, that I think I was thinking about this recently, and I thought you'd be interested, because I was just with a couple other collectors, most of them younger than me, walking around the fair, and I think there's a lot of interest in redefining what it means to be Asian American and thinking about our identity in a global context that I feel like the older generation is not as attuned to. So I see collectors noticing artists that maybe were born, like an artist that's being shown at Bank right now, Ching Ho Cheng, he's already passed away, but he was born in Havana and Chinese, and then moved to New York when he was, I think, 7 or 8 years old, and lived in New York ever since. But I think there's a lot of rediscovery around artists within the Asian American diaspora, where a lot of people, I think my age, I speak Chinese at home. Chinese is my first language, but I'm also pretty comfortable in English, and I've lived in the US for a couple of years. And so people are grappling with what that means as a collector, where I think the identity is starting to differ from the generation of our parents, who arguably is the first generation that started collecting contemporary art in China.
So is there a parallel to that? And I want to talk a little bit about TRLab and what they do and NFTs, to then leaning into digital work in a different way, as opposed to the parents that looked at just painting or painting. Sculpture was even a big reach. So do you feel that there's some similarities generationally about that for how I look at art, not just how I look at who I am?
Totally. I was just with
Yeah, a good one on that.
I was just with a Gen Z collector. In Chinese, we call it Ling Ling Ho, like they're born after 2000. And we walked by a gallery, and he said, "This gallery is interesting to me, but I'm not able to learn that much about them because they don't have a significant Instagram presence." So I think there's a lot more reliance and interest in learning about something digitally online.
So were you studying everybody's Instagram accounts before you came here? Were you looking at all the PDFs that went? I don't want to open any of them. Did you open all of them?
I opened most of the PDFs because I think the fair is also quite overwhelming if you're just coming blank. So I feel like I also tend to work on my phone a lot, and I'm very comfortable on my phone. So I feel like I'm looking at PDFs, making notes, and taking Instagram screenshots.
I think the lesson for the dealers is you have to do both. You have to appeal to the OGs like me, who have a certain way of doing it and want to communicate, and you can't just do that. Nor can you just say, here's this big digital file to people, just do that. Part of their challenge is they have to do both.
I do think that in person is still incredibly important. I think there's nothing that takes away from the experience of seeing art in person. And
During COVID, were you and your family buying things you didn't see?
not really.
Not really?
Not ever. And when we did, it was always artists that we knew very well that we had purchased works from, rather than sight unseen.
I mean, you can sort of tell if you know Ed Ruscha, you can look at an Ed Ruscha JPEG and kind of figure out how it is. I'd say less so for a Rothko or something with surface or.
I think you always want to, you don't want to get an artwork and be surprised. So my mom has always abided by viewing before purchasing, even if they're not in the same city, going somewhere, or having a trusted person that can go and take photos and videos.
Now let's go into the digital. Did you see much in your 5% of what you've seen in the fair?
I've actually not seen that much digital. It's quite funny because, I mean, 2 years ago in Miami, it felt like NFT Central and everyone was talking about NFTs. But I think now that obviously the NFT market has crashed and gone away, there are still platforms and institutions standing that are interested in digital art, but they're approaching it in a much more specific manner.
Well, I keep being told it's coming back, it's coming back. So I think it just got out ahead of itself, didn't know how to present itself, didn't know what it meant to be sold or owned or shown. So can you tell us a little bit more about what you do with TRLab and what's coming up? Because it's pretty exciting.
Yes, and
now it's different.
I think for us, TRLab's mission is to pioneer a new way for people to participate in art, and we're really focused on crafting bespoke, online first educational experiences for people to learn about art. So that may mean you know nothing about the artist going into the experience, or that you know a bit, you know the significant works, but you don't know a lot behind the artist. So Josh, as you know, we are launching a partnership with the Chris Burden Estate, which I'm incredibly excited about, around Burden's unrealized works. And I know that you probably have a lot more stories that you could share about Burden.
Well, you'll see our panel talk that we're taping next week. It was funny because you were telling me what you were doing, and I said, oh, you know, Chris Burden, I used to be Chris's gallery and his dealer, and you went, what? And it was kind of like, it's like before you were born. But why Chris? What's important about teaching the world about Chris Burden?
I think Chris Burden is such a pioneering artist, but he's known by, I feel like he's known by most people for two works, right? Shooting Himself and Urban Light. And I just don't feel like those works, especially after getting to know him and his works, the estate and his works better, and define him as an artist. There's so much under the layers where he was really kind of this nerdy scientist, pioneering, doing things that other people weren't thinking about. And I think that's important to be highlighted, especially in the work that we're doing with artist estates, where especially after an artist passed away, I do think that they become known for a single image or a single defining moment in their career rather than all the stories that make up their legacy. So we're excited to help the Burden Estate highlight that.
So it's sort of tell the story, but still commercialize it in a way that's not quite like just taking a Matisse and turning it into a token that you use as an avatar, right?
No, we're not really interested in things like fractionalization or tokenizing. And I think what we're doing with Burden is especially interesting because it's around his unrealized works. I would not be interested in a photo of something that already exists in the physical world and just turning that into an NFT.
And circling back a little bit to the fair, because I know we both have to get back in it, is there any sort of general statement that you get walking through? I know we're all getting interrupted, but we're getting this little bit of take in the corner of our eyes of, is there a moment you can see if the works are political, they're not political, they're about beauty, is there something that you, in 2 hours, people who can't be here, what observation would you like to make?
So I'm saying that as someone who has seen like 5% of the fair, and I focused more on emerging gallery, so I haven't seen a lot of.
So you started on the outside and then moving to the center. I start in the center and then I move outside.
I think usually if Actually, the first ever Art Basel I went to was in Hong Kong with my mom, and we usually start in the center and then move outwards. So it was quite interesting going the other way around. I think for what I've seen in the more emerging booths has been a lot of works around identity, a lot of works thinking
You did listen
about.
to our first
I
live
did
stream
not.
when that's what I talked about. Wow, it's like, you sure? It's like somebody passed. It's true. That was my observation, is that it's about identity, but say more in what way do you mean?
I think whether it's artists that grew up in different cultures, artists that are potentially like the ones that I've been thinking about are Asian American but did not grow up in Asia, artists who are returning to Asia for the first time. But I also think identity in other contexts, like queer artists, artists that don't necessarily have they have more fluid thinking around their gender and what it means to be a global citizen in the 21st century. And there are a couple works that I found quite interesting.
Such as?
Not visually, but more so hearing about the stories behind the artists. So one work that I actually thought was really interesting was in Curie Manzuto. And it's an artist named Wang Shui. And Shui is an artist that I came to know through Rockburn Art Museum because Shui had worked with X to put on a show earlier this year in March. But seeing his work at an art fair, where I think you may find his work quite interesting, he uses AI in certain aspects of his work, but he refuses to tell you which parts he has used AI in. And it's a lot of thinking around the fluidity of texture. He is also from the Asian American diaspora, but has never spent a lot of time in Asia. And it's him grappling with what it means to be.
I think this shift
New
went
person.
from identity politics in art to just identity. And that you were brought up, you're young enough to have a lot of academic work on feminism, on gender, and that's second nature to your generation. It's not a new story. See, with my daughter, with the kids in high school, that's easy for them. For our generation, that took a lot of work to get to that point. You take it as sort of normal, but then the identity of like the individual, as opposed to just that identify as a feminist, yada, yada, yada. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think it's very much so someone's individualistic experience rather than being a part of a group.
Well, I'm going to let you get back to all that. And we'd like to thank everybody for watching the Baer Faxt Live from Art Basel Miami Beach, brought to you by Heritage Auctions, where history is discovered, sold, and made every day. So be sure you bid on their thoughtfully curated works of contemporary art at ha.com. Check out what's going on with TRLab. They're the greatest, Rockburn Museum. And we'll see you at 3 o'clock with one of the world's great art advisors, Gabby Palmieri. Fight on.